Hey, welcome back to the channel. It is time for episode 6 of our read-along, our book club of John Langan's The Wide Carnivorous Sky and Other Monstrous Geographies. And we're talking about two stories today. We are talking about the Revel and June 1987, Hitchhiking, Mr. Norris. But before we move on, let us talk about this week's sponsor. It is sponsored by a man who desperately wishes he could become Barry White, but alas, we do not yet have the technology in our modern age to make this dream come true. However, he made my dream come true by sending me this shirt, generously sponsoring this episode. It reads, Mike Flanagan must be stopped. And the script text denotes the class that Mike Flanagan embodies with his writing, with his work. And if you can't tell, I'm being very sarcastic here. But if you would like to learn more about my feelings of Mike Flanagan, please check out this card here where I review his modern-day masterpiece, Midnight Mass. Sorry about that. But thanks again, my friend. The shirt is very much appreciated. And I know, even though you wish you could become Barry White, I would like you to know that
I want you just the way you are.
Let us move on with the Revel, the werewolf story. We start with the chase. Every werewolf story these days at least features a chase. This one is no exception. And here again, we are treated to John Langan's experimental writing. So we have what almost appears to be a long-form outline that is describing what makes a good werewolf movie, how one might play out, and how what our part of it is in it. Well, that totally came out wrong. And what our part is in it. So I just took a couple of highlights here because this one, it didn't really quite grab me as much as the last one. So I really love The Shallows, as you know if you watched last week's episode. But you can see here that essentially we have a bunch of bullet points. We start off with the chase, which is describing, sort of best practices, I guess, for something like this for a werewolf film. And then we get into the setting, the village. And then I put this highlight here because you have wondered, who hasn't, to what extent the places you meet in the stories and the novels are tied to real locations. The answer is more closely than you think. The same is true of the people in them. And I believe John Langan is from the New York area, and all of these stories, or most of them, have taken place in there. So I'm sure that rings true here. But then we move on again. The forest. So we start in the village, go to the forest, and we're just we introduce the character, the police chief, but then later on, the most important character is Barbara Dinasha, who we follow in quite vivid detail through her encounter with this strange creature. And I highlighted this because, are you familiar with phrenology? I didn't know the word. I knew what it was once I started reading it. But I really like this because John Langan, he constantly turns the camera on us. He constantly asks us to think about things or to consider things we may not have considered before. So it was a 19th century science that tried to ascertain personality characteristics through mapping the shape of the skull. We all know what this is. And we laugh. We laugh at that, right? How stupid. And he indeed says, you laugh at such an idea. We all do. But how far away from it are we? Because we searched the newspaper and magazine pictures of the perpetrators, trying to find, desperate for a clue to their motivation in the set of their eyes, the curve of their mouths, and the tilt of their heads. And indeed, we do. We always judge books by their cover, even though we're not supposed to. And if someone just looks off, we think they are off. We do this all the time in our lives. So even though this is kind of just a random aside, it was a good one. I appreciate this kind of stuff in fiction. It doesn't feel like he's trying to get preachy or ham-fisting anything, but like I like it. And this I highlighted for a strange reason. I listened to this Andrew Huberman podcast. He's a neuroscientist, and here we talk about a sketch of the werewolf. Her sketch is of the man's hands, which are distinguished by long, thin fingers, and particularly, that's a hard word to say, the ring fingers, which stretch longer than the middle fingers. And so what Andrew Huberman said is that if your ring finger stretches taller than your index finger, then you had some high T levels, some high testosterone levels, or adequate testosterone levels in the womb. So thank your mothers if your ring finger is taller than that. But let's see how I oh man, thanks mom. Here's the other hand. Thanks, Mom. I had low T in the womb, unfortunately, but sorry for the little scientific aside. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if John Langan was indicating that, but it just really brought that image to life and reminded me of that podcast episode. And then here we go. Finally, John Langan is addressing us, the characters, you. Yes, you're part of this. Do you even need to ask? You leap from character to character, a voyeur rifling through home movies in the most intimate sort. And so this got me to thinking, like, do we ever really think about why we read stuff? Why do we consume fiction particularly? Is it because we want to live all of these different lives? We want to be a voyeur. Is it just for escapism? Is it just for entertainment? Is it all of the above? So tell me, why do you read? Let me know in the comments. I'm just curious. For me, I feel like it's sort of all of those. Like I really enjoy like different perspectives and sort of seeing the world through different people's eyes. And I believe there's a quote somewhere, and I should have dug it up, but some writer, I believe, said, you know, you can only live one life, and through fiction you can live as many lives as you can read, essentially. But also, now that I write it is an educational venture as well, but I still do just absolutely enjoy reading. I think fiction, the written word, nothing compares to it. Nothing compares to it. It can essentially do anything, and as long as you have an imagination and can picture this stuff. And finally, we move on to a small town in the north where John Langan starts throwing some poetry at us, and that is through the eyes of the monster himself. The answer lies on the other side of the experience that the monster himself cannot articulate. When he tries to bridge them, he sees images sparse and stark, whiteness, the town, distant on the tundra, words on white paper, 2 rows of buildings. The town sits on the plain, lonely, even of ghosts. Really cool stuff. It's kind of random how he threw this poem in here, but again, just demonstrating what a great writer he is. And finally, in the showdown, 6 drawings hung in a coffee house. And so John Langan asks us, how many such images does it take to convey a story's climactic actions? 2, 4, how about 6? And so we are at the very end of the story, and these images are going to show us exactly what happens. And this really hit me. Again, John Langan, I feel like we could hang out and have a good conversation because we seem to have a lot of the same interests. And I'll read this highlight here. Their style, if you know about such things, you would recognize the debt they owe to the early work of Bernie Wrightson. Bernie Wrightson, who illustrated the original Swamp Thing comic books. He was also a concept artist. He did some concept work for The Mist, the film The Mist. But I'm a big Bernie Wrightson fan. In fact, I have 2 of his prints hanging in my house. I have his Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is one of my favorite films of all time. The original, 1974, I believe. And then I have one of his illustration from Frankenstein. Yes, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I have this book right here. It's a really awesome book. It is her text in its entirety. What Bernie Wrightson did, and I'm just kind of trying to remember exactly what happened, is he went out to a cabin and did all of these beautiful, beautiful pen and ink drawings that are just carrying you through this tale of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Hopefully it comes out okay. Yeah, that looks all right. But you can see just amazing, amazing work. Mind-boggling detail. I mean, check this one out. Just amazing stuff. Bernie Wrightson was a master. Sadly, he's no longer with us. I also have an out-of-print book of his called A Look Back by Bernie Wrightson, and this kind of catalogs his entire career, or up until the publication of this. And very interesting artist, extremely talented guy. But on that note, it got me thinking about one of his very specific works, and that is called The Cycle of the Werewolf, Stephen King's novel. He wrote a long time ago, but Bernie Wrightson provided some illustrations there. And so I was kind of going through these climactic imagery that John Langan, by the way, like expertly describes. I mean, it's in such intricate detail that I was completely able to visualize this stuff. And so what did I do? I went to Google to try to see if Bernie Wrightson had done anything in this regard, but no, it was just, I think, a coincidence, or maybe John Langan was just, again, trying to like give us little clues of his inspiration. And I appreciated that. So at the very end, what do we see? At the very end of this tale, we see ourselves. Yet, there you are. It isn't some quality of the paint making in a mirror. You're in there with Barbara and the police chief, and the man with the beast's head too. He must be in there. Even though you can't see him, well, his body must be. The expression on your face is difficult to read. Is it a curiosity, eagerness, hunger? So yeah, enjoyed this one. It didn't quite hit me as hard as the other ones. It didn't have, for me anyway, the depth of something like The Shallows, but again, I'm a little bit partial to stuff like that. Let me know, did I not read this deeply enough? Is there something deeper here that I completely missed? I'd love to hear about it, but let us move on to June 1987, Hitchhiking Mr. Norris, where we have a man named Laird, a boy, apparently. Boy, his father said to him, "You do not hitchhike." And they're having this conversation, and Laird is asking his dad, well, is there any instance where I can hitchhike? Is there any instance where it is okay to hitchhike? And he says, all right, if there's an emergency, but never, ever, ever get in the car with a single driver. And right here, and you absolutely do not flag down a car truck with a single driver. No way. You're better off staying with whatever disaster it is. Getting in a car with some strange guy. And so Laird, unfortunately, does not listen to his father's advice. And then gets kidnapped by a man named Mr. Norris, who's driving this strange car or this vehicle. We're here, he describes it himself. I shall read it to you. This car, he said, it's not a car. Well, of course it is, but it's also something else. It's an instrument like a pen. Yes, a pen. The earth is its paper. I'm using it. I'm like the hand that uses it to write a sentence. Only in this case, it's not so much a sentence I'm writing as a word, a kind of word, a word that's also a hole in the paper, and what comes through the hole. I know, it's all very confusing. A pen needs ink, and we know that blood is the ink, and he has this kind of modification to the back where he can kind of kill people and then let them bleed out along the roads, but it is so slight that it does not cause any suspicion from the police, so he's never chased, and his work is almost done. But he talks about these supplicants, and right when we believe he's going to finish his work, Laird fights back, and he takes his knife out and makes quick work of Mr. Norris. But then, at the very last instant, we see the trees shifted with a breeze he didn't feel, and then he saw it wasn't the trees moving. It was what was between the trees, the tall, spindly things he had mistaken for their shadows. For a moment, he watched them stepping forward, raising legs that were much too thin, too high, a comedian's parody of walking quietly, and then he was running as fast as he could in the other direction, out of the clearing, along the path that wound across the great meadow. So, funny enough, Laird gets picked up by a UPS driver. But anyway, it was a cool concept. It was short and sweet. I was just hoping there'd be something more substantial at the end, some kind of thing that really hits you. The punchline of the story, I guess you could say. And maybe I didn't read closely enough. But let me know. Did I not read closely enough in these stories? Are there things I'm missing? Please let me know in the comments below. Or you can continue the conversation on the Discord. It is free to join. That brings us to the end. We have one story left, and that is The Mother of Stone. The longest story in this entire collection. It's about 50 pages long, and I think that's fair enough for a week, right? 10 pages a day, less than 10 pages a day. I'm sure you can do it. And if you can, if that's too fast, fear not, the video will be here for you to check out once you do finish it. And I've had a really good time with this entire read along, this book club, whatever we want to call it. I hope you have too. So give me a like, spread the word so other people can find this if they're maybe delving into John Langan's novel or a collection of short stories, and start thinking about what you'd like to read next, because I really enjoy the format and I intend to keep doing this. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching. And I will see you for the final entry in the series, Mother of Stone, next week. Bye.
I want you just the way you are.